Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lou1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Her Song is a Sin. Chapter 7. Riel stepped out of the shower and toweled off. She slipped on a robe and made her way to the kitchen, where she'd programmed the automatic coffee maker the night before, and her favorite brew waited for her, filling the guest house with the aroma of a rich Guatemalan blend. She poured herself a cup of the sweet, slightly nutty coffee and perched on a stool at the island. After reading the security report from the nightmen, all had been blissfully quiet. She pulled up Scylla's schedule for the day. After Beltane, Isadora had cancelled most of the musicians' elective events, and so Scylla's schedule had been effectively cleared of everything but contracted concerts. Riel expected that today's calendar entry would also be blank, so the words photo shoot both surprised her and made her groan. Riel had thought that they were done with that for a while. How many did this make in the last month? It seemed like every time Riel had turned around the first few weeks, she found herself accompanying the musician to another photography session. When she asked about it, Isadora told her that Garrett wanted the brunette's face to be in as many places as possible, so that she would be on people's mind when it came time for the award season and potential nominations. The pacing of one shoot after another had been brutal. The aftermath of Beltane had been a quiet reprieve from the packed schedule, but it appeared that the quiet had come to an end. Photo shoots were an exhausting ordeal for the brunette and boring as hell for Riel. The shoot with Mojo took over 10 hours, and the one with Pitchfork lasted 6. Hell, even the one with the local Massachusetts Art and Culture magazine took over 4. Riel glanced back down at the schedule to see who would be taking up their time today, but there was no more information available. All she could see was that the entire day was completely blocked out with the one shoot. That meant Isadora must have expected it to run fairly long. Definitely gonna dress comfortable today, Riel thought. She donned a simple white button-up blouse tucked into a pair of belted black slacks. The bodyguard decided to go with a pancake holster on her belt, forgoing her normal shoulder holster. She checked her weapon and left the guest house for a short walk up one of the stone pathways to the drive. The air had a chill in it, and it seemed like fall was in full swing. Riel thought about her home and the fireplace that she'd have roaring if she were there. Sadly, the guest house didn't have one, and she seriously doubted that the fireplaces in the mansion had ever been used. She wished she could make a trip back home, even for a night or two. But with so much still unknown about the threats against Scylla, Riel was firmly planted by the musician's side. Stepping up to the car, Riel gave Helen a nod. In her role as bodyguard, she normally rode shotgun, but as she looked through the passenger door window, she could see that Garrett occupied her usual seat. She frowned at Helen, who just shrugged. Moving to the back, she slipped into the limo and sat across from Scylla. The tension in the car was palpable. This was the first time since Beltane that the entire crew had get back together in the same space with the musician. The limo was quiet, save for Garrett, who was already busy on his phone rescheduling Scylla's events. Byron and Isadora sat side by side but didn't speak, and only offered the bodyguard a small smile. Porter wasn't in the car, and no one offered an excuse for his absence. Scylla, normally indifferent on a good day or bitchy on a bad one, was still unusually quiet. She twisted her hands together in her lap, and kept her gaze on the floorboard of the limo. She had a nervous air about her that made her look incredibly vulnerable. Rael quirked a questioning brow at Glory Muffet, Scylla's makeup artist and hairdresser, but the normally joyful and bubbly woman just shrugged. Rael could tell it would be a long drive. When they arrived at Swide's Records, Rael had to forcibly relax the jaw she'd been clenching the entire ride to the recording studio. As soon as the car came to a stop, the occupants scattered as if they were trying to escape a burning building. They moved into the studio and Isadora excused herself, walking to the left instead of right, saying something about needing to meet with the legal department about contracts. Garrett kept his phone to his ear and walked down a hall to the right and into the large room reserved for the shoot. Byron followed the publicist quietly. Only Scylla's mood seemed to improve when she walked inside and saw a man standing in the center of the room, directing at least half a dozen assistants as they bustled about with lighting equipment and props. "Gregorio, I'm so glad to see you." "Thank you, darling. You know how I love to photograph my sexy little siren." Gregorio Shellbark answered, making his way over to the brunette. He kissed her on both cheeks, stepped back, and looked down at her with a grin. "So, today's the day, huh?" Scylla gave a breathy laugh. "Yeah, it's time." "Good. I'm so glad you decided to do this. I thought that perhaps after Beltane, you would decide to postpone this little shoot." "I need to do this," Scylla said. Gregorio slapped his hands together and rubbed them. "Wonderful. I'll think you like who I've got lined up for you. Someone worthy of the ram's horn name. But first, let's get you prepared for the cameras." Scylla walked into the dressing and makeup area, set up at one side of the studio room, and Glory followed. After doing a walkthrough of the area and taking notes of the various exits, Rael deemed the location safe and found herself a seat on a couch in the corner of the room where she could watch the shoot and wait. A young man came by and offered her a drink, and she accepted a bottle of water. She just got out a book that Scylla had lent her and had started to read when she felt the cushion beside her shift. Looking up, Rael was surprised by the woman who had sat next to her. She'd gotten used to being surrounded by beautiful people on this job. They were usually props in a sense, used to accent and highlight Scylla's own natural beauty. But Rael had never seen someone like this at one of the shoots. The woman could have easily been an early Kate Minnick's twin, right down to the "I only fuck girls" smirk on her face. Her slacks were black, with a sequin stripe running down the seam line, and she wore a black sleeveless blazer with nothing under it save a black bra that did nothing to hide her small, pert breasts. The heavy makeup on her face made it clear that she was ready for the shoot. "Hi there," the woman began. "Hello," Rael answered, and looked back down to her book, more interested in reading than in the physical embodiment of lesbian sex beside her. "So, you're the bodyguard, huh?" "Yeah, can't imagine what gave me away," Rael answered sarcastically. "Besides the gun?" The woman gave a husky laugh, and Rael's hand instinctively brushed over the butt of her weapon as she looked back up at the woman. "When I first saw you, I thought Gregorio had brought you in as the backup model," the woman explained. "I'll admit I was a little jealous. I had hoped to have Scylla all to myself today. So I asked his wife about it, and she told me you were the bodyguard." It took Rael a moment to process everything that the other woman had said, and by the time she did find herself blushing at the obvious compliment. Yeah, that's me, just the bodyguard," Rael managed. The brunette flashed another smile at Rael and offered her hand. "And I'm just Tracy." Rael shook the offered hand and then looked over to the photographer sporting a loud hot pink satin shirt with a Kelly green ascot and tight black jeans. He gestures this way and that as his assistants move props on and off the set as he light tested them. "Wait, he has a wife?" The dark-haired woman laughed again, her green eyes twinkling. "Yeah, the short feisty brunette over there." Rael searched the room and found the girl that Tracy was talking about, pointing up to a set of track lighting and talking to a man in coveralls who was nodding at whatever it was that the brunette was saying. "I've seen her around before." "Libba Swithe," Tracy supplied. "Daughter to the owner of Swithe Records." "Oh," Rael answered. "Everyone is connected to someone somehow in this business." "I guess so," Rael replied. So, Rael, speaking of being connected, I've heard quite a bit of talk about you lately, Tracy began, moving closer to the blonde on the couch. I can't imagine what you'd hear about me, Rael answered, shifting herself away from the model. Well, apparently, there's some new staff at Tony's, and I suppose they haven't learned a rule about keeping their mouths shut when celebrities are about. At the name of the restaurant where she had her little flirtation with Scylla, Rael's brow quirked. She didn't think that anyone had seen them, but she was obviously wrong. The fact that someone had, and that the information had already spread like wildfire to this random model, made her incredibly uncomfortable. The last thing she wanted for Scylla was to have her stupid flirtation with the musician pasted across the tabloids. The interaction fodder for gossip mongers. Damn her and her bravado. Her need to accept a challenge would have cost the brunette a lot of problems. Well, the best she could do now was shut down Tracy's inquiries. Rael stood and looked down to meet the model's gaze, face neutral. She made a point of looking over at the set being prepared for the shoot. Well, Tracy, I think they're about ready, so I guess you'd better get to it. I'm going to get a coffee. Tracy's brow furrowed, surprised at just how quickly she had been dismissed and disappointed she wouldn't get any information from the blonde. But after a moment she shrugged and stood up. Nice to meet you, Rael. Rael watched the model walk away and shook her head. She made her way over to the snack bar set up along one of the walls and busied herself by making a cup of coffee with the Keurig machine on the counter. Garrett stood nearby next to a camera tripod, sipping espresso and talking to a short, balding man in a suit. Agreeing with whatever Garrett had said, the man's head bobbed up and down, and Rael thought he looked like one of those little bauble toys people stick on their dashboards. Across the room, in the dressing area, Byron chatted with 3 women as they finished preparing for the shoot, a man flitting around them with makeup brushes. Apparently, Tracy would have to contend with backup models after all, the bodyguard mused. Rael's eyes searched the dressing area, but she couldn't find Scylla. She was probably still behind one of those privacy screens where they had taken her to get dressed. Even though the studio room was huge, the noise of various people chatting was loud, and the room was already as hot as hell from the lights. Rael leaned her back against the counter of the snack bar, her coffee cup in her hands, and let her eyes roam over the room, taking it all in. At first glance, everything appeared to be chaotic, but after silently watching for a few moments, she was able to pick out patterns and was beginning to see the natural hierarchy of this particular shoot. As Scylla stepped from the dressing area into the open space of the room, everyone stopped what they were doing. The siren had arrived, and she was breathtaking. She wore a floor-length black satin dress with sequins. Several parts of the fabric were see-through, highlighting the brunette's curves. There was a slit in her dress, running all the way up its length, giving everyone a generous view of her legs whenever she walked. Rael swallowed hard and watched as Tracy made her way over to the brunette. She could tell that the model was already coming on to the musician. There was a tightness in her stomach that she didn't like, and Rael fought the twinge of jealousy that she felt. She forced herself to look away and drink her coffee. This was none of her business. The shoot started out as a disaster. They had tried several different poses with different backgrounds and set props, but the normally bewitching and mesmerizing Scylla seemed stiff as a board. Her eyes looked lost rather than turned on. When Gregorio had Tracy hold her, the brunette seemed miles away. To shake things up, Gregorio gave the other girls a whirl with Scylla, even though he had only scheduled them to be there for the group shots, but none of them seemed to have chemistry with the brunette either. Even though Scylla had proven to be an accomplished actress, it was obvious that no amount of acting would make her look good with the women he had provided to be at her side in front of the camera today. They moved on to a series of portraits, and Gregorio liked what he saw behind the lens. The musician was breathtaking, and all of her solo shots came out perfect. She did well in the group shots too, but as soon as he tried to go back to doing a few intimate couple shots, the stiffness in the brunette returned. He didn't get it. Normally Scylla could flirt with a chair and make it look sexy, but today she just seemed occupied by something else. And Tracy, who could usually make a nun give up her vows of chastity, didn't seem to interest Scylla at all. After trying for another hour, Gregorio flopped back in his chair with a sigh. I'm sorry, Gregorio, Scylla apologized. I don't know what's wrong with me today. Gregorio was brilliant in his craft and one of the nicest people you could know personally, but when he was on a shoot, he wasn't known for his friendliness. Nothing got in the way of his art, especially not his subject's feelings. He sighed at the brunette and shook his head with frustration. Go get yourself refreshed and we'll try again in half an hour. From Riel's vantage point on the couch, she could feel the tension in the air and she knew the brunette was having a tough time. Although they were exhausting, Scylla usually seemed to enjoy the shoots. She would chat with the models and joke around with the photographer and their assistants. Here, though, Scylla seemed withdrawn. She clearly wasn't getting along with Tracy, and it was obvious the photographer was disappointed with the shots he had taken of them. Riel watched Scylla walk away from the photographer, and she was surprised to see that there were tears in the brunette's eyes. Before she could stop herself, she stood up and walked over to the musician, who had perched herself on the arm of the gray club chair that they were using for the shoot. Hey you, bored to tears already? Riel teased. Scylla let out a small laugh, though the tears still shone in her eyes. What's wrong? Riel asked, her voice gentle. Scylla shook her head and stood up next to the blonde. This shoot, it's important, and I'm royally fucking it up. Why is it important? Riel asked. It's for the Advocate. Riel's brows shot up, because for once she knew exactly the magazine to which Scylla was referring. She thought back to the time she'd spent with the brunette, and what Tally had told her about the musician. Scylla's music exuded sex, but most of the lyrics were hetero in nature, and although Scylla seemed to flirt with both men and women, she seemed to do it more to get under people's skin than to actually attract someone to her bed. When Riel first started the job and had asked for a list of known associates, the section under lovers had been left blank by Isadora, and in the various outings to clubs and concerts, the bodyguard had never seen a brunette actually do anything with anyone else but flirt. Still, there were loads of rumors. Scylla's lack of being obviously romantic with someone seemed to make the tabloids even more desperate to publish their theories. Obviously, the musician had decided to clear up at least one of the many rumors. Oh, Riel answered. So it's kind of a coming out article? Yeah, it's a big deal. Scylla let out a shaky breath. She hated herself for being so weak. She'd never been this way before, with the exception of the time right after her parents' death. But since the disaster at Beltane, she couldn't seem to get control of herself. Riel didn't like seeing Scylla so upset again. Before she could stop herself, she pulled the musician into her arms in a hug. Scylla stiffened for an instant, but then she relaxed into the embrace and returned the hug. After a moment, Riel released the musician and used a slender finger to wipe a stray tear on Scylla's face. Hell of a way to come out. You just have to do everything big, huh? Scylla smiled at Riel, feeling some of the tension she'd felt ease. Moffat's gonna kill you for messing up her art. Yeah, Scylla answered. No one wants a weepy canvas. Riel laughed, and Scylla took Riel's hand in hers and gave it a squeeze. Thank you, Scylla said. From his chair, Gregorio watched the two women closely. The blonde was attractive, and as the two talked, he watched Scylla's entire energy change. The bodyguard said something else to Scylla, and the musician laughed and then hugged the blonde again. Gregorio noticed the spark returning to the musician's eyes, and he reached for his camera. This time, they didn't let go at the end of the hug. They stood in each other's arms, and Scylla looked at the blonde. Riel found her lips an inch away from the brunette's face. That soft scent of sandalwood and earthiness assaulted her senses again, and Riel thought she could stand there all day with the musician just breathing in her scent. Scylla wanted more, though, and she tilted her head to meet the blonde's lips, intent on kissing her bodyguard. The sound of several clicks in quick succession stopped Scylla from claiming Riel's lips as the blonde instantly took a few steps back and jerked her head towards the sound. Don't move, Gregorio chastised. Whoa, dude, what the hell are you doing? Gregorio, Scylla growled, angry for the interruption and mortified that Gregorio had possibly caught them nearly kissing on camera. This is the most natural you've looked all day, Scylla, Gregorio said, shrugging at the musician. He moved around them, snapping a few more shots. I don't like my photo taken, Riel said, her voice an icy warning. Gregorio looked between them and let his eyes settle on Scylla. Darling, if you're really going to do this shoot, then you need to do it authentically. And trust me when I say that what I see here is authentic. If you do anything else, it will be a disaster. Everything else today has been shit. But Rael isn't a model. She's your bodyguard, I know, Gregorio snorted. I don't think anyone's going to try to take you out here. Surely she can take off the gun for a few photos. Photos going in a magazine, Scylla said, as if anyone needed reminding of that fact. Gregorio shrugged. So we publish her as an anonymous actress. Who cares? I care, Scylla answered. Rael's brows shot up and she looked at the brunette. Flustered by her confession and the blonde's scrutiny, the blonde looked at Rael and stammered, I'm sure that you've got a reputation. I wouldn't want it to interfere with your work. Rael seriously doubted any of her future clients would read The Advocate, and if they did, so what? Her face had already shown up in several articles about Beltane. She didn't like the way Tracy had interacted with Scylla, and it bothered her that the musician was having such a tough time. If taking a few photos would help her, then why not? Scylla had said that the shoot was important to her. Deciding, the blonde looked over at the photographer. You really think you could get the shoot done if I helped? Yes, it will be magnificent, Gregorio answered, smiling at the blonde. Okay then, Rael said, at the same time as Scylla said no. The two women looked at each other and Rael shrugged. You said this was important. Rael, I can't ask you to. The blonde shook her head. Look, I'm no model, but if this guy thinks he can get me clean up enough to help you, then I'll do it. If you want me to, I mean. Rael added, blushing. She hadn't really taken into account that the brunette might not want to be seen in pictures with her. She wasn't an I fuck girls model after all. Scylla stared into Rael's eyes for a moment. The blonde was stunning, and Scylla wanted nothing more than to get closer to the bodyguard. The excuse of taking intimate photos would be perfect. Still, she didn't want the blonde to do anything that would make her uncomfortable. Finally, she looked at Gregorio, who was impatiently waiting for an answer. Nothing over the top. Gregorio clapped his hands together and then raised one hand and put it over his heart. I will be perfectly chaste. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.